Hi, welcome everybody to another Psychedelic Safety Seminar. Um, I'm Jules Evans. I'm the founder of the Challenging Psychedelic Experiences project. I'm also the author of the Substack Ecstatic Integration. And today I'm thrilled to host Stephen Hayes. Stephen is the founder of Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, or ACT, which is a widely used evidence-based approach within cognitive behavioral therapy. He's a professor emeritus at the University of Nevada in Reno, and a leading figure in contextual behavioral science. He's published hundreds of scientific papers and several influential books, including Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life. And his work focuses on psychological flexibility, mindfulness, and values-based living. Now, Stephen has briefly discussed psychedelics in the past, including in a conversation with Matthew Johnson, but this is a rare opportunity to hear his thoughts on how psychedelic experiences inspired and helped him, how ACT could and does work within psychedelic-assisted therapy, and also a bit on my favorite topic, which is how ACT might be able to help people recovering from post-psychedelic difficulties. I'm going to add some links to papers that Stephen mentions and to other psychedelic papers that have used ACT in the chat. Stephen's going to speak for 30 to 45 minutes. So you can put your questions in the chat as well. And I will pass them on to Stephen at the end. So over to you, Stephen.
Awesome. Let me go ahead and share my slides, but let me just start by thanking people for coming. I appreciate that. And I'm looking forward to being with you today and maybe supporting you and how you support others, both on both sides of this issue. So let's see if I can get to the right share. And you should be seeing a little title slide. Along with a reference to an article that I wrote a few years ago summarizing not just some of the psychological and neurobiological correlates of psychedelics, but how that suggests things in terms of the psychological flexibility and other processes that are central. And it actually influenced the model. And it's not been widely used for reasons I don't really understand, but I'm going to show you that model in just a few slides. A model of psychological flexibility that was in a way driven by psychedelic experience. And I'm going to talk about my own a bit. You're looking at an old hippie, and I'm going to tell some of those stories in ways that I've never done before. Um, so this kind of the arc of what I want to do, and also a little caveat. The arc, I want to really focus on sense of self and some of the other key psychological flexibility processes, especially as expanded by our last 4 or 5 years as we've explored process-based approaches, process-based therapy. If you followed my work, you know what I'm talking about. For here, I'm not going to go into deep details other than saying embodiment, social extension of these processes, and expanding out, like in the affective domain, not just acceptance, but also not clinging to positive emotions, so on, expanding out the model a little bit and allowing it to breathe free. If you do that, you know, you really can, I think, make sense of a lot of what's going on in psychedelic-assisted therapy, uh, and in when it goes awry and what to do about it. I'm not going to talk a lot about idionomics. It's the last thing in there in this list that you see here, but it's really important. And the central claim of idionomics, and we have the data now, just put in that term in Google Scholar and look at what's coming. One size fits all, fits none. And so we have to start learning how to personalize people's journeys. Boy, is it here in this fact that this powerful technology that can be helpful can also be hurtful. And what are we going to do about that? Well, I think what we have to do is make the particular journeys of particular people of particular importance and get the scientists lined up with that instead of trying to shove everything into bell curve standard deviations and what normal means. That's a train wreck. It's never going to get better. It violates its own mathematical assumptions. Rant over, but I may be able to touch on that. The caveat down here is I'm not a PAT protocol developer. I'm a supporter of progress and originator of ACT. I'm a co-developer. I don't allow people to say I'm even a founder. I'm an originator. I lit the match, and then other people brought the wood, and there was a big bonfire. It's not my bonfire. I just lit the match, and the match was lit in part for some things that I'm going to talk about today in terms of psychedelics. So take it with a grain of salt. And if you want to ask a lot of details about what did you do during a dosing session, you really got to get the wonderful people from CBS and in general. But we have a big footprint there. And if I name names, I'm going to get in trouble really fast because there's so many. But I am going to name one or two here in a slide or two. But there's literally dozens of ACT and contextual behavioral science, the name for a general reproach, uh, researchers and clinicians who are involved in this work, and you'll encounter them quickly. So the places where I really feel especially able to speak is just what's happening with the underlying processes of change in psychedelic assisted therapy and early, but also post-psychedelic difficulties. The core empirical claim I want to make is really therefore more process oriented than ACT, especially classical ACT, as a model for doing this kind of work. Now, if you expand it out a little, I think it's a wonderful foundation. But where I'm really solid is that the outcomes appear to be tied to processes uh, that are really quite understandable in terms of psychological flexibility. Especially, I'm going to talk about sense of self, perspective taking, openness, um, and especially and here I won't talk much, but as extended by the more recent work, last 5 years in ACT and process-based therapy. However, when psychedelics go awry, these same processes can be helpful. And I think we know that already, but we know it also by analogy with all the work that happens with people having challenging experiences and being traumatized by them, for example. There's such a good database there that psychological flexibility is involved. And because of that, ACT, psychological flexibility, contextual behavioral science, process-based approaches, process-based therapy, I think is a pretty plausible process-based integrative technology. But comparative evidence is pretty much absent. So I can't say, well, still, at least it's early. I can't say this is the best and data prove it. No, just check it out, and if you're in the work and see it as something that you can explore, and if you're a researcher to contribute to what is now the increasing flow of data. I want to do a little shout out to Rosalind and Jason Loma's ACE model, which is a modification of the psychological flexibility model. Their core article actually is entitled something like that. How can you apply psychological flexibility to psychedelics? I can't remember the exact thing, but it's there in JCBS, the Journal of Contextual Behavioral Science. As I mentioned, CBS is the generic kind of knowledge development strategy for the community that is developing not just ACT, but functional analytic psychotherapy, helping with compassion-focused therapy, and many other of these so-called third wave. Um, so that model, the ACE model, I think is a pretty powerful and great start, and it's been used in multiple trials, and it's right now being used by the team that came up with it. There's an MDA trial going on there at Portland Psychotherapy Institute that Jason and Jenna Lejeune head up. Um, and it reorganizes the classic ACT model a little bit in the ways that are described here. I'm not going to spend time on it because I want to talk about something where I have spent more time, which is in the chat stream. I think hopefully it's been uploaded. There's an article from 2020 that walks through what I could see at the time, it's a few years ago, on what's happening with psychedelic assisted therapy and what it both the underlying neurobiology and the psychological correlates suggest. And on both, and looking ahead, this is several years ago where people weren't talking about it that much. We talked also about negative effects of psychedelics and what to do about it. not in detail, as much detail there because for reasons that people here would understand. That has come in following the wave of interest in psychedelics. Now, here's what this little model shows. I'm going to go there and then I'm going to back up and talk about my personal experience. And then we'll see how much time I've got to really get into maybe a few things to say about the kind of practical work that some people listening to me right now do. Psychedelics often shift experience away from a rigid self narrative. You can see that in the underlying neurobiology. You can see it in the psychology. The storied self, the narrative self, I am fill in the blank, is an evolutionary recent phenomenon. It can't be more than 2.5, 3 million years old. It's probably less than that. Why? Because the language trained chimpanzees, and we overlap so much with them that arguably you might be able to breed with them. Please don't try this at home. Um, their DNA so much overlaps with us, and yet they don't do the very first step that you need to do to develop normal language and cognition. And that's from the relational frame theory research that is the basic empirical, not just theoretical model that underlies ACT and has been, central to the ACT journey. Basically, we've got a parasite grabbing our midbrain structures and censoring out sensory and sensory motor information that doesn't fit our narratives. And the more we buy into our narratives, the more that happens. And we live inside that conceptualized world. We can feel as though we're so alone, nobody loves us, and we're surrounded by loving people. Absolutely, no question we can do that. And when the those gatekeepers are opened up and embodiment, there's a lot more to you than the chatter, chatter, chatter in your head starts filtering through. I mean, it goes all the way down to the brainstem in terms of this filter functions, but the higher cortical functions for sure are dominated by this language parasite that is 1,000 times more recent than some of the neurobiology it's harnessing. You know, it opens up and you have an opportunity, a chance to see the world in a fundamentally different way that I think allows this core witnessing, noticing sense of self that is built out by language, but is afforded just by our underlying neurobiology. Why would I say that? Well, look at a neonate looking at kind eyes that land on it, and then compare that to other critters out there. We come at birth ready to be a social primate. We are connected to others in consciousness. The whole consciousness story, evolution is a consciousness story as perceptual systems, sensory systems evolve. We're increasingly aware of, not the aware of the world like in some sort of category. It may be, we'd be living in the matrix and it's falling green letters. How do we know? But in order to be able to survive, you have to be able to have an operating system that allows you to interact in and with that one world. That's a story of consciousness. But when we developed these relational learning processes and could step out and look back at ourselves, it put this sense of self, this witnessing, noticing, awareness sense of self. It's called the deictic I because deictic frames are perspective taking frames. I, you, here, there, now, then, that allow us to shift our perspective across time, place, and person. You can imagine that, it's 100 years from now and Florida's underwater. What is it going to be like? And you can be distressed by that. You can care about your great, great, great grandchildren who won't even know your name. You can worry about what's going on in the Ukraine right now. You can shift your consciousness metaphorically around time, place, and person. And that sense is powerful, or when you break down the dominance of the narrative self that is grabbing some of our underlying neurobiology. And the article I sent allows you to kind of dive into some of that was available several years ago. When that happens, when you connect with a perspective taking sense of self by, the chemical processes that reduce these or alter these gateway functions, but done in a proper context. Don't think the shrooms are freaking talking to you. Man, I lived that train wreck. I'm looking at an old hippie. No, if that's true, they're saying some pretty bad stuff because it went from the summer of love and I was there to needles on the street and people lying in dog poop. And psychedelics was part of that process. And if we don't own that, take responsibility for it, we're going to do another train wreck. And if we allow big pharma just to grab it, patent it, and throw chemicals at people, we're going to live another version of that train wreck. And it makes me mad to see the possibility coming because we don't have the regulatory environment in place to protect people from that in the name of money or in the name of, the what happened in the hippy dippy days. I'll walk through this a little more. But when that shift happens, when we can touch this deeper sense of self that we're evolutionarily adapted to touch, um, it, especially if you can allow that embodiment process to channel into these healthy psychological processes, acceptance, diffusion, present moment contact, mindfulness can become more psychologically important. If you don't have any guidance, if you don't haven't given any kind of structure to it, it's a bit of a loose cannon because when those gates open up, you can also be overwhelmed. You think you're going insane. You're going to die. I have down here the Grateful Dead medical tent issue, and the reason I put that is my wife was there for years, following around. When the Grateful Dead was around, being in the medical tent, you had to have one because people would come and listen to the Dead, and they were dropping whatever they could get their hands on, but heavy psychedelics, and they were terrified sometimes. They had bad trips and stuff around. Not just because they're, eating strychnine, which of course happen when people are trying to just make money off, people who are willing to pay. But no, even if you have pure LSD back to the drops on the papers, I mean, I was there with acid chemists who would make it absolutely pure and titrate it, or tartrate it so it would last a long time and all that craziness. Yeah, you can be really overwhelmed and people would think they're going to die. My wife tells me two biggest things back then, it may have changed. I hope this doesn't seem politically incorrect. But people come into the tent terrified that they're going to die, they've gone insane, or they're gay. And this is going back a few years. But basic stuff, that is in the basement shows up. Why wouldn't it? You've opened the door. But don't feel as though psychedelics are the only thing. If you look at mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, were for first-time depressives, it's arguably iatrogenic. You open the basement door when you enter into these more mindfulness spaces. Now, if you've had multiple episodes of depression, no, MBCT is quite reliably helpful and great technology. But be careful about just opening the door to the basement when we haven't had the social support for what to do when that happens. And chemically doing that is it's dangerous without support. And that's why I worry about big pharma because you need the wraparound. And so these things we see in the PDR, like, only uses anti-smoking medication with behavioral support, and then the doc's script and they go, and then it has, by the way, it's lethal if you combine it with MAO inhibitors. And they're writing scripts to people who are on MAO inhibitors. How often do we have to learn that we should not be roadkill by the current regulatory environment, people making money. But anyway, it then also can change how values and meaning are contacted. Because when you open up to these embodied sense, I'll get to the mediators, but I'll just mention one. As the self as context, we call it an act, or this deictic I, perspective taking, I, you, here, then. Here, there, now, then breaks down, and you touch the capacity to move consciousness metaphorically anywhere at any time with anyone. There's a sense of this kind of oceanic connection across time, place, and person. Well, that can really be a powerful goad to human values. What I do right now could be relevant to what's going to happen many years from now. what I do right now could be relevant on the other side of the world. And you feel like you're part of something. You are part of something. You're a social primate. You're part of this amazing journey, this amazing species called Homo sapiens. And the ones that preceded the Neanderthals were helpful too. And you got Neanderthal DNA in you. So that's part of your heritage as well. Now, here, let me unpack this little figure, and then I'm going to tell my personal story. What I'm claiming here, and this is Zhu Hongzhu's special contribution, he sometimes calls it the Chinese version of the hexagon, is that there's these yin-yang kinds of processes in each of the things in the psychological flexibility model, which on the left side is, being more open to emotions and cognitions, as opposed to being avoidant or attached or fused, meaning dominated by it, to come in the present moment in a way that's flexible, fluid, and voluntary instead of having your attention jerked to the past and the future as conceptualized from this witnessing, noticing sense of self that involves breaking down or loosening the conceptualized self, the narrative, I am a person who, connecting into this ongoing experiential quality of self. And in this model, there's that one floating above it all, which is this kind of pure awareness, you could say. Not even awareness of anything, but the capacity to take perspective. And from there, on the right side there, focus in on your uh, values, what you really want to be about that's intrinsic to your behavior, and build habits around them. And that little swirly part in the middle is by way of saying, in each of these areas, we swirl. Sometimes we're hooked, sometimes we're open, sometimes we're avoidant, sometimes we're not. And when we get all these processes going, and I would want to add, and your body and your social relationships, from this more witnessing, noticing sense of self, you can make some choices. You can alter what's happening in your life. You can move ahead. And that's, I think, what's really wonderful and terrifying and scary and powerful and sometimes unhelpful about psychedelics. I threw up just a little bit, the hippies grew up. This is Paul Emmelkamp, an old curmudgeon in the Netherlands, who said, Steve, this is nothing but goddamn hippies growed up. And there's some truth to it. The whole third wave is just the revenge of the hippies on the psychology of the 50s and 60s. These are some of my heroes, I guess, or, folks who I can trace had something to do with ACT, B.F. Skinner, helpful, especially over there, and Fritz Perls and Albert Ellis and Tim Beck. I was never at war with Tim Beck, but also Werner Erhard, and then you got a couple of you got Joshu Sasaki Roshi over on the bottom right, and Swami Kriyananda on a farm where I lived, and there's Tim Leary. I don't think ACT happens without any of those people the way that it is. The third wave would have happened anyway, one way, shape, or form as we move towards mindfulness work. If you don't know what the third wave is, it's the change that happened in cognitive behavioral and behavior therapies to move from the content of our thoughts, feelings, etc., to how we relate to that content. That shift, which is, back there in this psychological flexibility model that I'm sprinting through enough that you're probably not understanding it much if you haven't had a lot of exposure to it. Um, that shift is would have occurred without ACT, but ACT did have an originator. There was my night on the carpet, look at my TEDx talk, where I hit bottom on my own panic disorder. But the things that were in my history, a lot of these folks here are in my history. They're not in after ACT. I didn't borrow from them to. No, you're looking at a hippie growing up. Here's a few that on the left. That's me pretty close to sitting on Hippie Hill up in this poor tree that was crushed by us in the summer of love in the panhandle of San Francisco. I lived in San Diego, drove up there and spent time, lived it for a while, 406 Cole Street, right there on the panhandle of San Francisco. This one on the far right is me as I become the act guy. But in the middle, there's me learning with Dave Barlow. Does that look like Dave? That's Dave Barlow. And Kelly Brownell, my pals, on my internship year in 1975, 76. So why did I put those? It's a little bit of narcissism to do it, but I'm just saying, okay, it had a history. So let me just talk about that history with psychedelics just a little bit. I, like most members of my generation, explored psychedelics. Um, what was a little, but it was initially for a lot of us a spiritual journey. We prepared for it. We talked about what we would do. We made sure we had somebody who was safe. If, because you'd get paranoid, the cops are going to show up, things like that. You needed somebody to be able to manage. And we did it that way. Um, And I don't know why I fell into doing it that way particularly, but it seemed important to me somehow that this journey be about something. Yeah, I did look around and pretty soon sort of noticed that people wanted to just party or drop psychedelics and go out in the middle of the street or go to a rock concert. And that's all fine. But man, maybe it's because I just was a little too afraid. Uh, you know, I wanted this to be about something. And I'm going to you get war stories when you talk to people who've done psychedelics, and I'm going to tell you one of mine. I was sitting across from my best friend, John Jones, who died an early death, frankly, because he got too much into the whole drug culture and so forth. It ensnared him. He died in his 40s. But he was using entirely too many substances most of his life. But I'm sitting across from John uh, in the middle of the beginning of a trip, and he is tripped, and we've got a safety person in the room who's going to take care of us and so forth. And I'm looking at John's eyes, and I glanced at the clock, and it said something. I don't remember the exact details. Something like 5 p.m. or 4 p.m. or something like that. And I'm just sitting there looking at his eyes, doing what in ACT we call an eyes-on exercise, just looking at him. It was just done naturally. And he's sitting on a cushion over there, and I'm sitting on a cushion over here. And his eyes started getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I thought, oh my God, look at those eyes. And this is amazing. Look at that. Wow. And I could see the coloring of the iris, and I could see the consciousness behind those pupils. I could sense his presence, and I could sort of feel his awareness of me and my awareness of him. And it was wonderful. And then I glanced at the clock, and it's 4 hours later. And I almost fell over. Like, what? What? And I asked later what happened, and people said, well, you looked very peaceful and you had a nice smile on your face, so we didn't want to do anything, but your eyes were open, but you just sat there. Yeah, I disappeared into something. But when I came out of it, something had been touched. That moment of connection with my friend, I literally felt as though, that Beatles stuff, I am you and you are me and we are all together, cuckoo, cuckoo, cuckoo. That's a space you can enter into. Mystics talk about it, and the chemicals do open doors that make that more likely. And it's a wild horse. What are you going to do with that? Well, I didn't do very much with it. I revisited it a few places. I never did that thing of, it's Saturday, I'm going to go get high. I just didn't do that. At least not with any kind of intensive psychedelics. So the different ones I've tried, which were almost all of them at the time. I mean, there's things now that are different. But it left me with a profound sense of there's a space in which oneness with others and across time and place, where time stops or fundamentally alters. You know, I, this became a problem in my life, by the way, because this guy on the left, who's actually in college at Laurel and Marymount, decided to do for his senior project a study on marijuana and time perception. Very beautifully done, very carefully done as part of my honors project, which let me just say, the good Father Cyclic, the chair of my department, did not appreciate. And so when I got a nice letter from my head of my department, little did I know until I got rejected by everybody for 3 years and was saved by a friend of my brother's who asked Les Femi at Stony Brook, a famous mindfulness researcher who died a little while ago. I wrote a blog about this at my Psych Today, if you want to read the story. A hero I never met. I never met Les, but he saved my life as a psychologist. Because what Father Cyclic wrote in his letter was Steve Hayes is a drug addict and you shouldn't admit him into your program. Thank you very much, Father Cyclic. He's long dead. But, this crazy guy over here somehow thought that was really cool. And by the way, the president of the university decided to allow it to pass. So the hippies were so present that the poor Jesuits didn't know what to do. And I was the first hippie on the campus at Loyola Marymount. Anyway, point being, psychedelic experience was part of my history. It created problems for me, but I came out of it when I then hit a bottom of panic disorder, which I did. And I tell that story in the TEDx talk. To search for my name and you'll see it in YouTube or whatever you get over there. Or a bit.ly link is bit.ly/Steve's, capital S, first, capital F, TED, TEDL, capital. And you'll get to the story of my hitting bottom and my panic disorder. And so get time frames here. Summer of Love, that's 68, isn't it? So some of the stuff that's going on, I graduate from college in 1970, finally get in graduate school, West Virginia University, after I eliminate the bad letter. And this guy on the right now, pretty close to the night on the carpet that leads to ACT. That's when I'm at UNCG, and I went there in 1976. So it gives you the time frame. That means it's, golly, 6, 7, 8 years later that some of these things that are there, from not just, from a lot of people, not just Tim Leary, but a lot of people, ends up being put into uh, a protocol in 1981, published in 86, 20 years of silence while we work out the processes of change, the measures, the philosophy of science. And then I step forward in 1999 and say, here's ACT. And wrote the first self-help book, 2005, went to number 20 on the Amazon list. And I became the most hated person in CBT, which is ironic, since I'm part of that tradition, because I was challenging Tim Beck. But I loved Tim Beck. He allowed me to do the first ACT study in 1984, a Rob Zettel study. Now here, let me get something back to, that's my personal story. The space was in this entire generation. And things like, put Werner Erhard there. Dave Barlow was there and Werner Erhard, Marshall Linehan, I helped her get there, because she was still struggling with her self-injury and stuff, and she was a friend. Things that are, the hippies grew up, the third wave, the stuff that's out there now. But now what can we learn about this, or what can we do about this in a way that might be helpful? And let me see if I can say something practical. I believe that all of these kind of processes that we now know are correlates, and in some cases looks like we're getting pretty close to being mediators in the way we usually do things normatively, uh, can be helpful to people. And we have different names for them because there's different traditions. And so whether you call it ego dissolution or oceanic boundlessness, or, with proper support and knowledge that this can happen, it's not just placebo. These chemicals combined with that support and that search for meaning give you a chance to have a kind of a big step forward. And you see it. You see it, for example, in the Yale group that did one of the early, manuals with ACT, um, then doing a nice study where they did across time, where you bring the act part in and you see that change. Um, we're not yet there to say that it's a causal relationship, but it really looks as though these processes that happen can be made sense of in terms of a broad psychological flexibility model, especially if you expand it to your body and relationships as the way we do now with process-based therapy. So emotional breakthroughs, spiritual experiences, etc., happening during dosing is key to the transformational positive effects. But all of these things um, can go awry. And so if you look at it from a psychological flexibility point of view, reducing the domination of literal language, of problem-solving language, we call diffusion, is afforded, I think, by the reduced dominance of the narrative and its neurobiological correlates. So the chemicals help. It isn't just a psychosocial process. And, clinically, this means coaching, letting it come, orienting to observing, noticing, and doing that beforehand to a little degree, probably during the session, and certainly in terms of bringing it all together. These emotional breakthroughs, where when those doors open and feelings come, noticing that when you lean forward, you don't die. There is meaning inside even difficult feelings and being willing to contact that present moment and the feelings and thoughts it contains, turning toward instead of away, and knowing not to grasp and hold on. If you turn a psychedelic trip into a precious stone in a box, every one that follows doesn't meet the standard. You've now ripped off the chance. These kind of psychological insights of really contacting what's of importance to you also can be important. And I think the social context that reinforces safety, openness, and the rest are really important there. But this is the idionomics part. All of the statistics are based on bell curves and standard deviations and crude ways of getting to personalization with things like moderators, multi-level modeling. You go look at the work on idionomics, just put in that word idionomic if you're a researcher or interested, and you'll see this is a train wreck because it violates the assumptions of our statistical models. It's called ergodicity. I'm not going to spend time on it. But here's the thing. When you model people over time, one important person or couple or family at a time, and look at how things interrelate, you can follow out what happens with transformational experiences and you can do a better job of predicting what's likely to happen. I believe. I think we have enough data on that. So what we're seeing when people feel worse afterward is an absolutely obvious impact of everything we do. When every single process I've looked at, if you said something like acceptance is a wonderful thing, well, not if you're a first responder and you're out on the streets and you got to be picking up with an ambulance. You got to learn to suppress and then shift when you get home. You can't afford to be boo-hooing on this person you're trying to save. Well, okay, so everything that you know, every concept you know, every single one, when you look within the person over time in context, sometimes needs to not be used and sometimes will be harmful for particular people. Look at some of the research that's put in idionomics and you'll see it. So I'm not surprised by this. We should expect it. What is the meta message? Let's be there for people, learn how to support them. The psychological flexibility model is the smallest set of processes that do the most good for the most people in the most circumstances, I believe. Arguably, virtually all processes of change can be put into a single sentence. I'm going to say what it is. Life is asking you to learn to be more open, aware, and actively engaged in a meaningful life while extending that to your relationships in your body. Drop the mic, That counts for all processes of change in psychosocial methods. And I think biopsychosocial methods are clearly true as well. There's almost nothing you can name in the psychoactive areas where chemicals alone, medications alone do the work. That's not true with so-called antidepressants, which is a marketing term, so-called antipsychotics, which is a marketing term. No, all of these things, life itself is asking you now open, emotionally and cognitively open, aware in the present moment from this witnessing, noticing sense of self, this deeper sense of self that allows you to contact this more process-oriented sense of self and rein in the excesses of a narrative self. Actively engaged in what? In things that are meaningful intrinsically, not just goals, but how the person you want to be, the kind of love you want to put into the world or contribution you want to put in the world. And remembering that you got to take care of your body and you're a social creature, so that includes your culture. Now, so coming back to there, if that's true, and I made a pretty bold claim, but I'm not the only one. I mean, psychological flexibility viewed that way, we've actually done AI studies where it'll take every single item on every single mediator and all of the biological correlates and be able to put them into that sentence easily. Learn to be more open, aware, and actively engaged in a meaningful life, scaling that to your relationships in your body. Okay, that's great. We know what we need to do, and it's in our wisdom traditions, our spiritual traditions, etc. Now, what do we do when it goes awry? When you do a step, it could be a mindfulness program. It could be psychedelics. It's so intense that it's more obvious with psychedelics. Normalize and validate. Your experience is valid. Never question somebody's experience. Help them ground that situation to the present moment and to focus on what's here and what's actually present, because the mind will carry you forward into, oh my God, I'll never be the same. I can never go back. I've lost my mind. All the kind of things you see with trauma or PTSD, kind of quote unquote, another disorder. 6 million ways to get there. That's not a disorder, gang. Diffusion from catastrophic meaning. I mean, stepping back and noticing you're interpreting and trying to make sense of an experience, but hold that lightly enough that there's other ways you can go forward, even just helping people say, well, my mind is telling me I've damaged myself forever. Okay, your mind says that. Your mind says a lot of things, a lot of stuff. I mean, even 4-year-olds understand goofy with horns on their head, on their shoulder. You can deal with this. Willingness for anxiety, sensations, memories, etc. You know, open up, learn how to open up, and some of the scary stuff that has happened or the difficult things that are there. It'll give you a way forward, and you may even find that it becomes part of a learning experience. Bad trips can be instructive as you walk through them. Self as context, I'm back to argue. That's our techno term for this witnessing, noticing, you know, from here now, edgeless, pure awareness, sense of self. That perspective. So, for example, my mind is telling me I'm losing my mind. Okay, let's say if that was what came out of it. But how about I'm noticing that my mind is telling me that I'm losing my mind? That's what really happened, gang. You noticed that your mind said something. You didn't experience losing your mind. That's not what happened. You experienced that you had a thought and you noticed that you had the thought. Well, just say it truly. And I can show you the studies. That alone will help people through difficult experiences. That one thing alone produces just enough separation from a dominant, scary thing to be moved off. And then values reorientation. What would be of importance here? And sometimes all the way down to the next 24 hours as we walk through it and committing and linking behavior to it. But then doing all of that in the context of social support, which is what's so critical. So I promised I'd give 15 minutes. I've given 14. And I know you've been drinking from a fire hose, and some of these terms may not be familiar. Hopefully, there was enough sense that if you're interested, you'll be able to explore. I gave you the hook on idionomics. You can explore easy psychological flexibility. Just go to Google Scholar, put it in, have fun. Or, of course, training and acceptance and commitment therapy. If you're into psychedelics, there's good trainings going on from this perspective or point of view. If I've lost you completely, you have a chance to help me fix it. Or if there's just anything I've said that might be of use, interesting to you, we have time for our questions.
Thank you very much, Stephen. We do have some great questions in the chat. Let me kind of take advantage of being the host to ask one. So some of us not familiar with the history of ACT and CBT, I was interested to hear that, you describe yourself as once the most hated man in cognitive therapy. So, I'm sure that's a whole saga, so I don't go into it too
Yes.
deeply. But do you think that sometimes people can get like quite religious about therapy modalities, quite attached to them, and like, semi-culty, and then they attack people who criticize the model?
Absolutely. That sense of self includes this social sense of self. And in Asian language, it's not I, you, it's we, they. I mean, it's right there, and you see it right now in our politics, don't we? And so I think it's a natural human thing. Fortunately, if you're following the ACT work, for one thing, ACT people don't really care about ACT. They care about psychological flexibility. And they don't even care about classical terms. They're willing to bring in other things. For example, cognitive reappraisal, thought of as cognitive flexibility, belongs inside this model. And if you read, recent ACT stuff, they'll do that. No, it's not to tech challenge, dispute, and change thoughts. Beck was wrong on that. But he was that, but he never really 100% meant to say that. That was his acolytes. And so let's be more humble, gang, and focus on the processes that matter. That's why I'm moving heavily towards a process-based approach to ACT in all of these. Focus on the processes, but then, friends, what we encountered in this journey, you need to do it one important person at a time. Model that person and then look for collections. Don't shove people into normative categories and bell curves because you violate your assumptions to do it and you're riding roughshod. It will disappear that people are having trouble, for example. It'll trim it, it'll squeeze it down, and I can show you the data on that. So yeah, let's be humble. And I, I now am thought of well inside the CBT community. I always was really, but as people have calmed down and realized that the third wave, which was this big thing that happened with acceptance and mindfulness in many areas, DBT, ACT, MBCT, MCT, if you don't know the alphabet soup of CBT, now everybody knows that was important. The ocean came
Yeah.
in despite people sitting on the shore saying, "Don't come in, don't come in." Beck is right. Beck was
So
right about a lot of things, but not everything.
thank you, Stephen. Okay, so Laura asks, um, big question, how does social determinants of mental health interact with the ACT model and psychological flexibility?
Well, ACT is a social model, and the cognitive model, relational frame theory, is based on social cooperation. As you dive deep, values are always intensively social. Your social community, social support, etc., are part of it. We should never have done what we did in positive psychology, what some did, like Marty Seligman. Here are the virtues. Oh, just shut up. Those are your values, dude. Go to another culture. Come on. And so we need to be more respectful of our own limitations and ground all of our knowledge in the social context in which they emerge. But that includes the people that we're working with. And if you're working with people who are neurodiverse, who have different cultural backgrounds, or different religious backgrounds, for goodness sakes, you know, learn something about it, but learn how to ask the questions and listen. And you will find, here's what you find. All of these processes, it's like reinforcement. Reinforcement goes everywhere that a living organism, after the Cambrian, if you're a slime mold, don't worry about it. You can't do it. If you're a spider, you can, or a snake, or a horse, or a human. Yeah, reinforcement learning is 500 million years old. Okay, some of these processes that we're talking about are, are 1,000 times more recent, but they're pretty much baked in. And so the smallest set that do the most good for the most people, we've been on a journey to get those done in such a way that you can fit it to the cultural context and this kind of diversity, equity, inclusion thing, sensitivity that applies to everyone. And we're in a cultural context right now where DEI is like anathema, according to some politicians. It applies to everyone in a different way. I don't like just sort of thinking in terms of categories, like this racial group is like this. Wait a minute. Everybody, yes, know that, but listen to your clients and learn how to fit this social embodiment into the reflection of one important person or couple or family and allow yourself to be surprised. So, yeah, how does it fit? It fits in every single one of the concepts you've heard me talking about. And increasingly, I'm going to give you one example and I'll shut up. 1,440 randomized trials on ACT now, second only to traditional CBT in the entire world, a new one every 3 days. Half of them come from lower and middle income countries. Half of them. And no other approach can say that, not even close. And there's a reason, because we put it out in terms of processes and people fit it to their own culture in a way that fits. So this one of the single biggest producers of ACT knowledge is Persia, Iran, and but the whole and for good reason, because they see in the Holy Quran the same stories that are right inside ACT. It's an Abrahamic religion. You would see it too if you're Jewish or Christian, but you'll see it in all the wisdom and religious traditions. So mysticism, after all, is at the bottom of almost everything that we call wisdom traditions. Some mystic somewhere became that religious leader, or it didn't happen. Um, so,
Okay, should we take another? So
yeah,
Pedro
let's take another.
asks this. Another big question, but see if you can throw out kind of some brief thoughts. Pedro asks, what kind of experimental procedures would you build for research on psychedelics and ACT?
I would add high density longitudinal data on the biopsychosocial data, which is a little difficult if you're the one to do the bio side. You're going to have some wearables and things like that. Look at the work on idionomics. Look at an EMA style. Learn then in your randomized trials. Yes, you're going to need that, or nobody's going to listen to you. When you're in China, you speak Chinese. I don't. RCTs are not the end all and be all. I mean, I love that the Yale group did some within subjects stuff before they got to their RCTs when they did their first ACT protocol with psychedelics. That's beautiful. It's what should be done. And do the high density longitudinal data. If it requires grants, you're going to have to do the RCT, and you probably want to anyway. But embed it in there. And before you do just your traditional RCT analysis, look at one important person at a time. What was going on at baseline? Model it with at least 30, 40, 50 data points if you can, twice a day for a few weeks. It won't kill you. And then model the network after the dosing. And you'll see what you are calling transformation is a dynamical system reorganizing. And if you can then learn how to perpetuate a virtuous cycle instead of a vicious cycle, you can break people out of what's called mental disorders. They're not disorders. They're processes that have gone, they're evolutionary processes that have gone awry. And we can correct it if we know what they are. But if we average people and blur it, we can't even see it. The human disappears into an error term. And effing makes me mad. And it has to end. And so, yeah, we've been harming people inside our categories. And let's use the wonderful transformational technology of psychedelics done well, but also be aware that it can go awry to push this more general point that every voice matters. If you're not measuring and modeling, you're not listening. And if you're not personalizing, you're not treating.
Here's a question
That's a
from
message.
Alan. How involved, directive, or otherwise do you envisage ACT therapists being in the context of psychedelic assisted therapy? Alan says like Sherpa or witness or something else entirely.
Yeah, we've got to really work that out. I mean, I think if you know, in indigenous traditions, there's a good wind up. And I was even talking about the hippy dippies who were trying to do this as a spiritual journey. And I was part of that group. There was a wind up. We thought about it for weeks. We even thought about what we would want to explore and all that kind of stuff, and wasn't like party, but it became that. And it was a train wreck when it became that. So I think especially in the setting it up, taking the time, getting it so that people have a set for how to do it. And then was during dosing, I mean, light. You don't really want to come in heavy and hard with anything very, uh, uh, you know, but be there and nudging, and then resolving and putting together again. I think has can be a pretty heavy role, but heavy just shouldn't mean blah blah blah. Listen to me. It's heavy just in the sense of walking the person into preparing and uh, integrating as a skilled therapist, but with a focus on the processes of change that matter for those two phases. And then lightly during dosing, but and there I'm really not an expert. I'm beyond
Mhm.
my ken here, even suggesting. But I think we're going to have to work it out empirically, and I don't see a here's the answer yet on any of these things.
Mhm.
It's still early, and I think if we just turn it over to big pharma, it'll just be, you know, dose, trademark, patent, sell, and it would be a tragedy if we're part of that.
Do you have time for 10 minutes more of questions, Stephen, or you got a hard stop it?
I do have time, actually.
Okay, that's awesome. Here's another question. Hi, Stephen. I'm someone for whom the basement opened up as a result of psychedelics and have been dealing with the
Yes,
resultant fallout for many years now. My nervous
yes.
system has essentially collapsed, and I have a couple of dozen symptoms now. He says the effort required to overcome my collapsed nervous system and do my nervous system regulation exercises, combined with the enormity of the situation, makes just dealing with the situation feel incredibly overwhelming. Might you have any act-based advice for someone in such a situation? So I see,
Sure.
yeah.
Sure, but one of the things I would say is you notice you're entering into a narrative. And I understand this. You're trying to make sense of this experience. But just to say my nervous system, et cetera, that goes a bit beyond the evidence, number one. Of course it's involved. I don't mean that, but that's simple formulation. We all want to make sense of our experiences, but we don't have necessarily, we can't necessarily easily do that. So here's what you need to focus on. The variation within you. What are the times when things lift up, the times when things lift down? But be careful not to just put, oh, I'm disordered, I'm broken, look what I did in my nervous system, set on it. No, what are the things that you would like to achieve today? What are the small steps you'd like to take? Towards what? Towards something that's meaningful and of importance to you. Okay, now let's begin to look at what are the things that lift you up? What are the things that push you down? You may find that sleep is really helpful. You may find that friends are really helpful. You may find that being more emotionally open is really cool. But you're going to have to be wise about it. You can't just let your mind grab it and explain it. And you have lots of things on the internet and lots of experts out there who are going to give you their formula. And next thing you know, they're trying to sell you something. And so, I'm a little skeptical of some of that. Can we can we do this in a way that's kind to yourself? So look at the work on psychological sex flexibility. How can you be kind to yourself in this situation? Push that kind of reset button. Look at what's of importance today. And to the degree the nervous system is organized, I mean, you're looking at a person who went through 3 years of hell with panic disorder down to the point where I couldn't make sound come out of my mouth when giving a lecture in classes. I know a space where things can spin down to the point where you almost can't function. Go look at my TEDx talk and you'll see what happened there, but maybe that's helpful.
Mm,
The single most commonly downloaded book, can I do something just for free? The single most commonly downloaded book on the World Health Organization is called Doing What Matters in Times of Stress. It's an ACT self-help book. There's audio tapes that come with it. It's free. Search for it. And if there's any, it's a cartoon book basically with some audio tapes. And if there's anything in there that resonates, that, I'm doing this so that there's a feeling to it, there's a community, there's tools. They can be free. We're not trying to get money from you. That can help you one important day at a time, one important moment at a time, walk through a process of becoming more the kind of person you want to be and the kind of life you want to live. You're
Thank
not broken.
There is a question. A lot of people working with psychedelics in the underground and to some extent in the overground, working with internal family systems. And there's a question
Mm.
about do you think ACT is combinable with IFS? What do you think of IFS?
Yeah, I mean, IFS became very popular, and it's a wing off of Gestalt. You saw Fritz Perls there, which is a wing off emotion-focused therapy, which by the way shares the same root as ACT. That's a longer story, but the first book on Gestalt is Perls, Hefferline, and Goodman. Ralph Hefferline is a card-carrying behavior analyst like me, and so a rat runner. So, but if you don't understand that there's a weird wing of behaviorism that looks like this, well, there's another one you can see. Gestalt therapy he wanted to call it integrative therapy. IFS become very, very popular, but I'm a little scared of the reification. Apparently, even that some of these entities are real. Oh, please don't go there. Please don't go there. It's, uh, and the money. The fifth level of the fourth thing. Please, come on. I mean, if you look at my work, you'll say, hey, are you drawing things from IFS? No, I'm doing things I did 20 years before IFS. So this has been in the soup. And yeah, take the techniques, use them to move the processes. But don't hyperventilate and don't drink the Kool-Aid. That's my view.
Somewhat related in terms of talking about modalities, Rick asks, what's one sentence that would help psychedelic assisted therapy avoid trappings of prioritizing one therapeutic model over another?
Processes of change. Let go of the trademark models, even ACT. I don't really care about ACT. I care about psychological flexibility. I don't even care about that word. I care about the processes themselves. Why? Because they liberate people. So let's dig down to the processes that liberate people. We're the liberation community. And let's walk through this in a way that lifts people up one important person at a time. Don't categorize people into 5 out of 9s and 4 out of 7s. It's so broken. The beginning of the freaking DSM says, by the way, this isn't known to help improve clinical outcomes. Do you know it says that in the preface? Well, then what the F are we doing? Focus on the person in front of you. And really, if there's one thing you can do is get really interested in processes of change, measured idiographically. It could be a couple or a family, but I mean in terms of the unit you're looking at. And looking at variation within over time. If we do that, you do it intuitively, clinically. Take the time and use some of the new stuff that's coming out with EMA methods, and I'm back to the word idionomics. And I think that will give us more guide. And in other words, let our clients be our guide. That's what I'm saying. Let our clients be a guide, but one client at a time before you cluster into here's what it all means, because you ride roughshod over the particularity of people. And that's at a cost. That's at a big cost. One size fits all is a lie. The truth is one size fits none.
Going back to what you said about IFS and entities and things, if someone comes to a therapy session and they believe in entities after a psychedelic experience or multiple experiences, and some of their suffering is around that, how would ACT work with that?
Well, do a little diffusion. Of course, in religious traditions, you don't have the right. If people really want to sort of entity-ize, okay, but then look at the function of it. How is this helpful? But typically, when people are in this early journey, you can say, well, you've had this experience, you have the thought, you notice that. I mean, it's the same thing that we do with the chronically mentally ill. I mean, people have won Nobel Prizes who are hallucinating. So, and there's voice hearers in this group. I'm looking at a group that's big enough. There's a voice hearer somewhere. I guarantee it. And some of them, they're not telling anybody because they know they'll be thought of as crazy. So can you take that little step back so that the entity thought is here? We take the step back and we notice it, we still have that thought, but we also have the person in front of you, the life to be lived, the love to be made, the kids to raise, the job to go to, the art to produce, and so we call it diffusion. And it's not a matter of erasing or getting rid of. It's just moving it to the point where this is an aspect of your experience. And so the IFS stuff, I think, has an inherently diffusing thing. When you take a repertoire that's historically based, you give it a name, that lets you step back and look at it, not just from it. You're not just looking at the world structured, you're looking at the structuring of the world. That's wonderful. And psychedelics do that. But if you then grab onto that and say, this is the structure, this is the structure, the next thing you know, you want to talk to your friends about the structure. There was an entity, it was real. Yeah, I mean, okay, but down that road, where is your life? What are you looking at? It's okay to look at that. You can have that, look at that permanently. You'll never forget it. That's part of why we get these long-term effects from psychedelics. People don't forget. They see things and they can never unsee them. That can be cool, but not here. Here. You with me? Does this make
Yeah,
sense?
yeah, it does make sense. Yeah. Do psychedelics make values clarification easier, or can they create overwhelming cosmic values that are hard to translate into daily life?
The answer is yes and yes. They do make them easier, and they can do that. And it depends on the individual and how it combines as a complex network. We're evolutionists. We're evolving on purpose. We're evolving human lives on purpose when we're doing our clinical work. And evolution can go awry. You can spin down. And so, person on a drug addiction thing, yeah, it feels great. That's wonderful. I'm thinking of that back to my hippie days. I tried opiates only once. It was up in the Hollywood Hills and a famous person's thing with all these, Illuminati around and actors and stuff. I went home and I said to my wife, I'm never doing that again. He said, why was it bad? And I said, shit, no, it wasn't bad. That was so good. I'm never doing that again. Because you could feel, it would just suck you into addiction. Of course it would. And so, we've got to be careful with these processes that can happen psychologically. And we're using chemicals, dudes, that can produce transformational changes. So we have to be especially mindful, of how they can do that. So um, I've lost the question you asked, and I disappeared into,
Well,
being careful.
well,
My
we're almost
wagging
out of
finger.
time, but just as a
Yes.
last question, Stephen, I mean, I think a lot of us, this is the year when some psychedelics might get approved by the FDA.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
there's already ketamine out there, but there could be a whole lot of different substances that soon become part of the medical and possibly therapeutic landscape. So do you do you think that's how's this going to affect like the world of therapy? Do you think that therapists are all going to have this in the kind of in their toolbox? How can therapists prepare for this?
Well, I'm a little worried about what's happening because I'm afraid that it's going to become nothing more than the chemicals not to surround the support and all the rest. And we'll ride roughshod over the fact that some people will be the kind of folks who come to your channel. And so if we're going to do this responsibly, we're going to, when we're dealing with things that are this transformationally possible, we need to do it in a different way. So I don't think most therapists will easily gravitate towards it. I imagine there'll be more like centers and experts and things like that. What I'm most worried about is it will become only a means to deal with disorders, which is nonsense. The whole concept of disorders has been a train wreck. That there are abnormal processes. Take a hammer to my head and I'll behave differently, of course. But so much of what we're dealing with here are so-called normal processes combining in a way that produces these evolution gone awry. If we can untangle that knot, one important person at a time, or couple or family, I think we can be there for them and we can use this as an adjunct. If you really want to support, probably you will be referring. I don't think every therapist is going to want to go through the training to be a responsible person doing psychedelic work. Um, and I just hope the psychedelic folks don't just dive into the DSM and big pharma and disappear into yet another round of what is crushing humanity. Last little rant. You take our Western model of disorders, medications, treatments for disorders. Talk to anybody who does World Health, anybody, Vikram Patel, people like that, where you've had countries that didn't have this model, and then you come in and you put this model in. What happens? Everything gets dramatically worse. We are living through it, friends. Oh, look at our young people. No, some of that is what we produced. We, the therapists, we are responsible. And it goes all the way back to some stuff, really dirty stuff, having to do with eugenics and the statistics that underlie what we do. I'm not going to do that rant, but it's true, and I'm writing a detailed article on it. Look, uh, if we're going to lift up people, let's learn how to do it one important person, couple, or family at a time by focusing on the processes that lift them up, not just your ideas in your head that you're going to put on top of people. And what I worry about with psychedelics is because it's so powerful potentially, it can be harnessed by the same forces that have put money and categories and objectification and dehumanization, sometimes not realizing that you're doing it, but it's right there in the history of our biostatistics and our field. Do you know that two-thirds of the presidents of APA were card-carrying eugenicists from 1892 to 1947? You can't even find a book in intro psych that will talk about it except as history. It's not history. It's right there in your chapters on what good science is. It's contaminated everything, our diagnostic system, our analytic systems. And so let's be careful and use this chance to do something that really could make a difference. Be aware of the dangers and the possibilities and allow this to help us learn how to lift people up more generally. I think you're going to find that a lot of these things that psychedelics produce, and the processes they produce, we're supporting anyway, and we can do it. Some people would say, hugs, not drugs. I'm with you on that, friends. As an old hippie, this is not the only pathway. And let's use this pathway to help us learn how to create pathways that really lift up every human being that we are touching as helping professionals.
Mm.
Rant over. Thank you for the listening.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Really appreciate you coming to talk to us, doing it for free, and giving us your time and expertise. 400 people signed up, so everybody's going to get sent the recording. Everyone's going to get sent the articles that Stephen's mentioned. I'm going to send the free book that you mentioned as well. So thank you very much.
And I can send you these slides as
And the
well.
slides as well. Yeah.
So
Okay.
Jules, I'll send that right away.
Yeah.
In fact, I can probably even put it in the chat stream if people want to wait. If I end the show and I'm back over here, if you want it in the chat stream, I will find it on my computer and let's just see if it's there. I hope I grabbed the right thing. Let's see, talks, miscellaneous. Okay. That's not showing up. I'm gonna have to chase it. I'll send it to you, Jules, and you can
That's
send
fine.
it.
I'll send it to everybody. Okay. Thanks a lot again, Stephen. Thank you,
Take
everybody.
care,
See you
friends.
next time.
Peace, love, and life.